This week I heard a talk from Tom Wright, the well-known theologian and one-time Bishop of Durham. In this talk he pointed out the difference between virtue and vice. To engage in vice, he pointed out, what you need to do is you have to turn off your mind. You have to not think about what you are doing. Vice always means that we have to suppress our thoughts. But to the contrary, he pointed out, virtue is quite different. To grow in virtue, we need to use our minds. We need to engage our minds. It takes effort. He gave the example of someone who's trying to learn to play a Beethoven sonata. To begin with, if you're trying to learn how to do that, that will be very, very laborious. You will have to practice the piece over and over and over again. You have to be intentionally engaged in the process. And then somewhere along the way, you will begin to play that piece and it will become natural to you. And its beauty will begin to express itself. And he said, well, that's like how we grow in virtue. It always takes intention. It always takes effort. It always takes thought. I think this is helpful for us as we think about what it will take for us to fix our eyes on Jesus. You can't make any mistake about this. It's going to take conscious thought. It's going to take effort from us to do this. We know, don't we, that unless we train them, our eyes are all too likely, all too often will slip away to other things. So it may feel a little bit clunky at first. It may take hard work for us. But over time, fixing our eyes on Jesus will become natural to us. And that beauty will begin to express itself in our lives. In this week's video and in next week's as well, we're going to be thinking about what is it that we might meditate on when we seek to fix our eyes on Jesus. What is it that we need to think about? And this week what we're going to do is we're going to look at we're going to think about how we think about Jesus himself. How do we meditate on who Christ is in himself? And then next week we're going to think about meditating on how Christ is related to the Father and how we might meditate on what Christ has done and is doing for us right now. But today really it's the facets of Christ's person that we're going to be calling to mind. And there's 6 elements to this. The first thing that we will want to be thinking about when we fix our eyes on Christ is meditating on his greatness and his authority. There is no one who has the greatness, who has the power that Christ has. Christ's power is universal in scope. His power extends from heaven to earth. His power is without bound in either sphere. This is what Thomas Vincent points out. He says, Christ does what he will in heaven. The angels are at his beck. They execute his will and go and come at his command. And Christ has power on earth. He is the head of the church and head over all unto the church. He can restrain his enemies, conquer them, and bring them under his feet at his pleasure. Heaven and earth are the domain of Christ's authority and power. And what's more, that power is good. We've become all too familiar, haven't we, with power gone wrong, power that is abused. But with Christ that is never the case. He never abuses his power by unrighteousness. He is most just towards the worst and punishes them here less than their iniquities deserve. What kindness and clemency does he show to his own subjects and people. Christ's power. Christ knows when to exercise it and when to withhold it. And in the use of his power, he's always proportionate, wise in it, how he exercises the power that he has. Secondly, we will want to meditate on Christ's holiness and his purity. Christ is pure and holy. Christ is absolutely pure and holy. To others, that holiness, rather than that being something beautiful or attractive, to others that holiness is offensive, it's contemptible, it's something that cannot be withstood, and so is rejected by them. Christ's purity only calls to mind their lack of purity. But for those who know and love Christ, in him we discover the spring of all holiness. That means that holiness, rather than it becoming a kind of barrier towards us that is imposed by ourselves, rather than it being something that drives us away from him, in Christ we discover the source of, the fount of all holiness. We draw from his holiness into our lives. So meditate upon his holiness and purity. Thirdly, meditate upon his wisdom and omniscience. Marvel at the breadth and the comprehensiveness of Christ's wisdom. Christ is all wise. He is the Father and fountain of wisdom. Christ is omniscient and he knows all things. Christ knows the secrets of heaven. He knows perfectly the mind of God, and nothing is hid from him. Indeed, Christ is our wisdom. As Thomas Vincent points out, if you are wise, you will. If you would be wise, you must love Christ. Christ is so infinitely wise himself, and he alone can make us truly wise. He is the source of our wisdom. Fourthly, we're invited to meditate upon Christ's truth and fidelity. Christ is not only true, he's not only loyal, he's not only faithful, Christ is truth. Capital T, truth itself. Christ has never deceived anyone that put their trust in him. Christ is always better than his word. He is never worse than his word. He is always faithful. He is the best friend of the children of men. Think of the qualities of one that you would desire to be your best friend. One who you would think of as being worthy as a best friend. And then apply all of those qualities to Christ and see them there in him. They reside in him. And Christ's faithfulness should encourage our confidence in him and lead us to love him. Fifthly, and we've already picked up on several hints of this, meditate upon his fullness and all sufficiency. There is not only plenty in Christ, much, there's not only much, but there is fullness in him. Vincent says not the fullness of the cistern, but the fullness of the fountain. Not some fullness for some things, but all fullness for all things that are good. Not fullness for some time and to continue but for a while, but all fullness dwells in him and abides for all his people throughout all generations. All fullness dwells in him. It's never going to be exhausted, tired out, worn out. It's never going to need refilling from some other source. Whenever we turn to him, he will always be full. What is that fullness? It is the fullness of glory. It is the fullness of merit. It is the fullness of the Spirit. For the Spirit is given to Christ without measure. Christ is an overflowing and ever-flowing fountain of good. We've used this word fountain several times here, but isn't that true? Isn't this a wonderful description of what Christ is? And also a truth that what Christ has, he also gives. What Christ has, what Christ is also what he gives. What Christ has and what he is overflows to us. We don't have any need to drink from elsewhere, to find comfort or life elsewhere. For fullness comes from him. And each day, each moment, we are welcome to drink from that fountain, knowing that we will not, that we cannot exhaust it. Lastly, meditate upon his kindness and mercy. We'll come back to this again next week when we think again about all that Christ has done for us. As Thomas Vincent says, he is all kindness, all bowels, all compassion, all pity, all grace, all mercy to us. Going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, we can know these things apparently as facts, but what we want to do is to inhabit these truths about Christ and allow them to shape us, our lives. We want to hold on to these truths and make them the virtues that speak into and through our lives. And to do that, it's going to take effort to hold on to these truths, to keep our eyes fixed on Christ. So let me invite you to reflect this week. Well, what's it going to take? What is the work that you need to do for these truths to become even more real to you? How is it that you can fix your eyes on Christ so that in the times of challenge, of trial, of temptation, you can call these things to mind and hold on to them?